But when it comes to moral issues, when it comes to killing babies, when it comes to enslaving people, when it comes to trafficking people, these things are not preference issues, and there is no neutrality. Hello and welcome back to About Abortion. This week's podcast joined once again by Christian Hacking. Christian, thanks so much. Last week, if you didn't catch it, we were talking about some survey research work that Christian's been conducting, getting data on what people really think about abortion and the huge encouragement those findings present, that people, when shown the facts, many of them, in fact a majority of them, want to see abortion law in our land restricted. There's an open door to work towards abolition here. This week, Christian, we're going to be talking about some of the headlines, what's going on in the news, how it connects to this issue, and we're just going to do a bit of quick fire on a couple of things, and I think you might need to zip off, and then I'm going to talk us through an article that appeared in Daily Sceptic. But kick us off with what's been going on that's caught your eye in the news recently.
Well, thanks, David. Pleasure to be back. So the main thing I want to draw our attention to were two articles or situations. First, I want to talk about Extinction Rebellion. They've been back out. They tend to make the most of the Easter period. They love that kind of week leading up to Easter, but they've had something of a revamp in view of legislation. So I just want to comment briefly on that because, you know, as we think about a social reform movement, it's very interesting to keep an eye on other social reform movements and think, you know, what are they doing well? What are they doing badly? What can we learn from them, etc. I know we looked at the two ladies who tossed soup over Van Gogh the other day. So that's, I think, important to keep that ticking over. And then also a very interesting article from the BBC on victims of rape, which we can touch upon very briefly. But I thought, if it's okay for you, I'd love to start with a video.
Please do.
They can bang the drum, but who will listen? Today there were different messages outside each government department against coal development, water pollution, oil exploration.
We're here outside the Department for Net Zero and Energy Security because although this department keeps changing their name, they're not changing what they actually do inside. And what we want to ask them to do is the same thing that environmentalists have been asked them to do since the year I was born, which is to stop the expansion of the oil and gas we know threatens human survival.
The climate activists' message is familiar, but this is a new tactic. More speeches, less superglue. Discourse, not disruption. This is about encouraging all comers to the cause.
I'm surprised at the people who are coming down in a way, because when we started XR, you know, I expected a lot of my friends and family to show up, and this time the invitations landed and loads of those people who I was surprised weren't coming are all showing up, and we've got over 200 organisations backing it, so it's good.
The main organisers, Extinction Rebellion, says this weekend we shouldn't expect the stop oil style tactics of shocking stunts like the one this week at the World Snooker Championships, considered a turn-off to many. For example, XR promised not to disrupt the London Marathon. Writers such as Zadie Smith spoke.
All these scientists repeating inconvenient facts.
And Brian Eno, record producer for U2 and Coldplay, also joined the cause.
We think that there's a crisis, and our government apparently doesn't think there's a crisis. It's just not taking the matter seriously at all. I keep saying to everybody, we're all on the same side in this. It's just that some people haven't yet realised. And the government, unfortunately, are at the head of those people who haven't yet realised.
Even without arrests, there's still drama in the way they deliver their message. But many of their demands come with consequences and tough decisions for any government grappling with high energy prices, inflation, and a cost of living crisis. But they say, in the face of a climate crisis, the silence is deafening.
So there you have it. A Sky News article on Extinction Rebellion. This was out in their Easter break, and yes, one of those people wearing red there was a man on the third from the left coming in. But the question is, okay, so Extinction Rebellion have toned it down. They've promised to stop disrupting, supergluing, what do you say, discourse over disruption. They have... they literally distancing themselves from Just Stop Oil, saying we're not like Just Stop Oil.
Yeah.
Okay. And the question is this going to endear them to effective reform of green policy or not? Okay. Now, the jury is out on the matter, but I want to put to people now, so we have it on record, that I think it's not going to help them at all. I think what's happened here is, whilst one would argue, listen, we're getting loads of organisations involved, we're building consensus, we're getting people who wouldn't have otherwise come to London to stick themselves to stuff. I think they are going to lose their teeth by doing this, and I think they're already losing their messaging. Look how he started, from Just Stop Oil here to no drilling to fisheries here. It's the whole premise of the Extinction Rebellion when it first started was, listen, if we don't act, we're going to go extinct. It was very clear what they were doing, and they managed to garner huge amounts of publicity and other things on this stuff. But actually, by diversifying their messaging, by building a lowest common denominator with other groups, I think that actually they will become less effective less good at communicating their message to the public. And I think their radicals inevitably will probably end up going over to Just Stop Oil because they will be seen as the ones taking the kind of direct action here. Remember, none of this is violent action; it's direct action. It is law breaking, but I think it was interesting to observe that and to see what's going to happen next here. But for me, one of the most clear things is if you don't have a clear message, then the public are not going to even know what to respond to. And so I thought that was compelling and interesting. Absolutely, I could be wrong. We could see their influence increase, but I should think actually the latter will happen, that they will get more and more diluted, and it will become increasingly less clear as to what they're about. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for raising it. I think it's interesting to think about the difference between just in terms of the causes, the climate thing, and what we're doing in terms of public support. So the whole climate crisis narrative is extremely popular in our culture, and okay, they can say, well, not enough's being done, fine, but I mean, you can hardly pick up anything from a shop without their sort of climate credentials being sort of virtue signaled on the back of it. They're going to tell me how much the plastic was recycled, how much they're doing for this, how many trees they've planted. I mean, even things that have got absolutely nothing to do with that, that have generally a very low carbon footprint anyway, will virtue signal about those things. It's one of the key marketing priorities for so many companies, whatever they're selling, to prove their sort of climate credentials. So it's a cause which, at least in terms of lip service, enjoys a huge amount more public support currently than we do in our cause. And I think that's given them a bit more grace than we would ever get for some of the really extreme stuff they've done, like throwing soup. I mean, if we threw soup over anything, let alone a masterpiece of art, I think we would be punished far more severely just because of what we would be demonstrating about. So I do think that they've got more room to move around in. They can push harder in terms of disruption and law breaking and so on than we can at this stage. But I wonder whether they actually went too hard too soon, and now they're having to climb down. And I think that presents a problematic kind of picture, because had they done it the other way around, had they kind of got the consensus, let's talk about this, let's bring in lots of organizations, and then it really came to a head, focused, okay, now we're really taking action because not enough's being done. But to go the other way around, I'm not sure that presents a very compelling message. It looks more like you're losing your momentum.
But here's the thing, right? Extinction Rebellion was built on the premise that, the UK had committed to net zero carbon emissions, okay? But that they were failing to comply to this promise, and we were all going to die, right? So that's why you had people weeping as they were putting them, super gluing themselves to stuff and making these impassioned speeches, which and it's why good, fair, law-abiding citizens were willing to disrupt other people trying to get to hospital, because it was so life and death. Okay, now, it's kind of okay. It's life and death, but we'll just do speeches and poetry, and we'll dress up in red and walk around, etc. What I find so interesting about this is, but even in its strongest, right? The legislative framework for producing net zero, right, which, controlling CO2, a multi-trillion particle gas everywhere, right? It was super complicated, right? But they managed to garner the public attention onto this one thing, which is the government are not looking after what they're doing. And then they had their science to back it up, which is highly debatable. Are the ice caps melting? Is the climate totally changing because of this CO2 molecule, or is it other factors contributing? At the very least, right, without being a climate change skeptic or climate change denier, God forbid, it's very much debated. Okay. Okay, so what you've got with Extinction Rebellion is you've got a national message trying to implement a complex legal amount of change with some highly debated science. Okay, move to the abortion debate, right? Okay, and you've got a very focused message, which is the abolition of one law, like the abortion law. To abolish one law, right, with the science behind us, which, from the moment of conception, you have a distinct, living and whole human being. You can't deny that. Even Anne Furedi, the ex-head of BPAS, affirms that, okay? And regarding whether it's life and death, okay, you've got to take a number of steps with the climate crisis. CO2 levels, increasing droughts, maybe water levels, people rehoming, disease, etc. But even when people start dying, there's a number of steps before they start dying if CO2 is to blame, right? Whereas abortion is the intentional act that kills an innocent human being. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, whilst Extinction Rebellion currently enjoys all this media clout and virtue signaling and etc., really the facts are far more flaky in support of their cause, whereas the facts actually in regard to whether we should stop killing our own children in the womb are solid as rock. Right? Which means what I want to put to you is if we can keep the message very clear, if we can keep presenting the facts and the figures very clearly, and if we can act like it's a life-death issue, which is what the church has not done, then actually we can have a movement that is not only more effective but far more focused, and enjoys the support of the general public, right? Because we're not stopping people from going to hospitals, we're not stopping people traveling around the M25. Our whole premise is not to persuade or disrupt the common man. It's actually to persuade the common man to change the legal system of the elite, right? So the reason why I put this to you is that, there's no reason in my mind why the pro-life movement, learning from people like Extinction Rebellion, learning from their mistakes, learning from what they did well and badly, could become the single most not only prolific but effective social reform movement, right? And when I say effective, it's kind of like person to impact ratio. Right, you get all these, you get all these people dressing up in these red outfits, coming to London and doing their theatrics, and the common man driving your cab is still unsure, whether his diesel cab is destroying the world or not. Okay, but how much more impactful if actually we were postcarding, displaying, and getting the facts, doing much larger nationwide surveys, and focusing the attention onto this one single point, this 1967 law. I think that kind of focus and that kind of it could honestly be like a magnifying glass for the nation onto one point that is highly winnable. And so I just think it's cause for encouragement. The sense of injustice that God puts in our heart, right? We want to use it, and God bless our, these people exercising their right to free speech. They're using that sense of injustice, right? But it's just being badly wired, because it's not always, sometimes it is, but it's not always aligning exactly with God's heart. And people are crying about stuff that they should be laughing about, and they're laughing about stuff that they should be crying about, so that, but if our heart in justice, if that can be linked to this, the shedding of innocent blood, the sacrificing of unborn babies, the destroying of our next generation, the betraying of women on motherhood, etc. If that can all be harnessed correctly with the Word of God as its kind of framework and supportive casing, it's like, like we're talking something that is far bigger and beyond anything that we've seen, in politics since the abolition movement.
Yeah, thank you. I think, it shows what we're doing to be really, on the one hand, quite tame in terms of our methods. We're not blocking the M25. We're not trying to stop people get to hospital. Quite the opposite. We're trying to get life-saving help, the truthful information, to people who are in physical danger, or to those who are endangering those in the womb. So on the one hand, what we're doing is very unradical, but in another sense, it's been said somewhere, in a culture that hates the truth, or in a culture that loves lies, the truth becomes a radical act. Just showing the truth is radical because it confronts what our culture is doing. So I would encourage people who think that what we're doing is a little bit extreme, going out in the streets, showing the pictures. It's nothing compared to gluing yourself to a building. And actually, it reminds me of there's a chap in our church. In fact, I think, Christian, you joined us, didn't you, for a podcast with John Betts? He talks about the old the old preacher's notes for a sermon, annotated along the margin, point here weak, shout louder, and it's that sort of, because the science is so debatable, because the thinking through the economics and the impact, and are we going to do more harm than good? All of that's incredibly complicated, and so Extinction Rebellion, others, and Just Stop Oil have generally resorted just to sort of force and fireworks and it's impact in terms of disruption, whereas what we've got in our hands, the simple truth, can be proclaimed even silently, just by showing the pictures. We don't need to raise our voices. It is enough, and our experience on the streets confirms this. Just showing the truth about abortion is enough. It's confrontational enough to elicit a huge response and great opposition, because the reality protests itself. So I think it should encourage us. We've got the science clearly on our side, and if only we'll get out there and show the stuff, we can see people, as your survey showed us last week, we can see their minds changed really quite rapidly.
So, is Extinction Rebellion really rebelling against extinction? I'd argue perhaps not. Is our work? Yes, it is, and that's why we need to persevere in it. But Dave, I've got to bounce.
You got to bounce, yep.
But great to have me on the call. And,
thank you very much, Christian, for joining us. You need to head off. Thank you, Christian, but we're going to carry on, because there's one other bit of news that I wanted to pick up on for our listeners. So thank you, Christian, for joining us. I'll see you soon.
Until next time.
Next time. Frontlines and Headlines. Okay, so for those of us sticking on, I wanted to bring to your attention an article I saw in the Daily Sceptic recently. Daily Sceptic is a news outlet, came up really during the pandemic and so on, and focused very much on lockdowns and vaccines and so on. But it'll touch on various other issues. And this article caught my eye because the Daily Sceptic, which is has sort of personal connections with the Free Speech Union and other kind of outfits, which will certainly pride themselves on questioning the narrative. And whatever your view is, we want you to be able to say that without fear of punishment or being deplatformed, cancelled, etc. But what's quite interesting is that when it comes to the issue of abortion, even these Free Speech Union types, the Daily Sceptic and so on, even they can sort of get nervous. Do we really believe in free speech to this degree? And what caught my eye first of all about this article was the way in which it was being shared online by those involved in Free Speech Union, Daily Sceptic and so on. And they were almost apologetic that this was speaking into abortion. They felt they had to go overtime in saying, we're not taking a position on abortion, whatever you think, it's just a free speech thing, which they wouldn't generally have to do with other issues because that's just a given. But abortion is so confrontational. It's so divisive that you kind of got the sense that they only just about were willing to engage it. So the article has the heading, "Whatever you think of abortion, the WHO," that's the World Health Organization, "forcing it on member states should ring alarm bells." And I'll put a link to this article below so you can take a look. And I'm not going to read the whole thing now, but the basic story here, what's happened is the World Health Organization is now recommending that babies should be killed up until the moment they emerge from the birth canal, whenever a pregnant woman requests it. Through its updated abortion care guideline released in 2022, the WHO expects all member states to implement this policy. So this is a pretty big deal. This is the World Health Organization showing its clear support for abortion on demand right up until birth, and more than that, insisting that all member states should comply with that. Now, the article talks about this bit of news. It talks a bit about the morality of abortion, and it talks in particular about the way in which the WHO is seeking to enforce one particular view on abortion, an extreme pro-abortion stance, how they're willing to try and enforce that really on the entire world, including countries where the belief system is really very different. And actually this represents quite a minority view globally. Abortion on demand up till birth, that's a fringe extreme view. Many member states around the world are pro-life, or broadly pro-life. There are many countries in the world where there is no legal provision for abortion at all. The World Health Organization is very much aware of this and campaigns really to make abortion legal everywhere. So the World Health Organization is seeking to enforce its own morality on the world, and that's kind of the main focus of this article. And the author, a chap called Dr. David Bell, really his main point is the way in which this is being done is wrong. It's not democratic. It's not sort of community driven. It's very much from the top. It's a sort of totalitarian neo-colonialism going on here, a fringe Western view being imposed on the rest of the world. And that's true. That's a good point. That's the kind of point you might expect from sort of Free Speech Union types or the Daily Sceptic who don't want to take a position on abortion themselves. And so as the author says, this article is not about whether the WHO's policy is right or wrong, but the process used to reach its conclusions and what this tells us about the WHO as a legitimate global health advisory body. So that's a worthy point in and of itself. The way in which this is being done is wrong, but we mustn't miss the wood for the trees here. It's not just the way in which it's being done that is wrong, it's the thing itself that is wrong. The idea that it's okay and that it's healthcare and that it's even a human right to kill babies in the womb is wrong, and we cannot lose sight of that fact and get caught up in the secondary issues of process and politics. I mean, it's a bit like saying, well, I personally think child trafficking is wrong and sex trafficking is wrong. But, whatever you think about that, look at the way the paperwork is just not up to scratch. It's the process really that needs improving here. That would be inhumane at a number of levels. And no doubt this author is trying to maintain this appearance of neutrality to make his main point. But I'm saying his main point's the wrong point because process is not as important as whether or not it's violence being perpetuated. Now, I in particular want to just look at the first few paragraphs of this, because I think what they, beyond just the news story itself, which is significant, and as our friend Callum Miller, pro-life doctor, said on Twitter, if anyone thought the World Health Organization was just a neutral, trustworthy, morally clean organization, you're really living in a dream world. This is so wrong. It's a significantly politicized, a lot of private money from people with certain interests pumped into the WHO to direct it in certain ways. It's hugely politicized. And so for anyone who thinks that it's neutral, that it's just generally trustworthy, in particular for Christians who think, well, we can just trust our healthcare professionals implicitly, or the NHS or the World Health Organization, they're just trying to look after us. Please wake up. There are many, many very good doctors, and there's a lot that's good about the NHS. There's a lot that's good about the World Health Organization, but we cannot be naive to the fact that politically these institutions do have an agenda, and actually healthcare is not a morally neutral thing. It's based on values. It's based on worldviews, and in particular something in Western medicine that is kind of just accepted because it just sort of gets it just kind of soaks into the way we do things. We don't even notice it. It's like the air that we breathe. We just don't notice what it is. The idea that the alleviation of suffering is always the morally right thing to do, or the prolonging of life expectancy by any means is always the right thing to do. Either of those views, those are morally weighty views. They're not morally neutral. The sort of utilitarianism of we just want to reduce as much suffering as possible. Well, in many cases, the means by which that's promoted is killing other people. That is, babies in the womb, in the name of alleviating the suffering of others. So please, let's wake up to, firstly, the idea that these institutions are just neutral, and secondly, the idea that there is any such thing as neutral morally. It doesn't work like that. There is no moral vacuum, and healthcare is not a morally neutral issue. There are value judgments to be made all along the way. But the main thing I really want to focus on here is that issue of so-called neutrality, and just how untenable it is with an issue like abortion, and yet people still try, because that's what the first page or two of this article really focuses on. Is this chap, Dr. David Bell, trying ever so hard to persuade us that he's not taking a side on abortion. He's just objecting to the sort of politics and process of the World Health Organization. Let me read you a couple of things that he says here. He says, "I'm tied to neither side of the abortion debate. As a medical practitioner, I've taken part in surgical abortions, helping women to stop a pregnancy that they decided they did not want to continue." Wow. This is someone who wants us to believe he takes neither side of the abortion debate, and yet he has himself, with his own hands, ended the lives of human babies purely because, according to what he said here, women decided they did not want to continue. This is elective abortion. He's not talking here about some extreme circumstance where the life of the mother was at risk and he had to do something and try and save as many lives as possible. This is someone who, with his own hands, has killed babies, and he wants us to believe he takes neither side. And what's his justification? The next sentence: "I have also assisted some hundreds of women to deliver babies." So he wants us to believe that because he's killed some babies, and delivered others, he's neutral, or he's kind of, he's happy to work on either side. This is missing the point to quite an extreme degree. Imagine if I said, or if I was asked, do I believe in fidelity in marriage? Do I believe in being faithful to my wife? And I imagine I said, well, I don't really want to be too dogmatic. I support both sides. There are times when I'm faithful and times when I'm not. I really don't see myself as one more than the other. It doesn't work, does it? If you're unfaithful sometimes, you're unfaithful. And if you kill babies sometimes, then you're okay with killing at least some babies. Okay, you may not kill every single baby you ever set your eyes on, or every baby that comes into your clinic still in the womb. You're not maybe killing every single baby, but that is nowhere near being able to claim neutrality. Even standing by and allowing others to kill babies is not neutral, as Bonhoeffer said. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. So the idea of neutrality does not make sense when it's something morally charged, like violence against innocent babies. There is no neutral. He goes on to talk about the tragic death of his own child at 20 weeks gestation. He held this child in his own hands, who died sadly. And then in the next sentence, he says he could have been killed in many places if he had not happened to be born early. I think what he's referring to there is abortion laws that would allow babies like his own to be killed. And yet he seems sort of comfortable with that reality, claiming he's not taking sides. And then it just gets more and more sort of inconsistent and intellectually haywire. He goes on to say, philosophically, I believe in the equality of all human beings. No one has the right to interfere and control another's body. Not because someone grants us this right, but because we are humans. He's articulating fairly well there this concept that right to life, human rights, and so on are inalienable. That is to say, they're not granted to us by a government. They can be acknowledged and defended by governments, by the state, but they are actually granted to us by the dignity endowed in us and on us by our Creator. They're inalienable rights. And on the one hand, he kind of articulates that quite well. He says that this applies to medical procedures as it does to torture, and yet the irony is lost on him that he himself has tortured babies to death in surgical abortion. So he doesn't believe in the equality of all human beings. He agrees with the equality of all human beings, apart from the ones he wants to torture to death just because someone else says that's what they want to do. And then he makes this totally inadequate sort of pivot in his argument to say, well, however, because there is good and bad in the world, nurture and harm, the interpretation of this fundamental truth is not simple. At times we may need to kill another's body. We do this in war, for example, and so he makes a reasonable case for the fact that sometimes you might need to kill in war. But then he says, but we also uphold the conscientious objectors who decline to kill because of their religious or moral beliefs. Now, there are two issues here why this is not equivalent, or it doesn't relate to whether or not it's okay to kill an innocent human being in the womb. The first is, in war, we're getting into situations in which killings may be justified. It may be a just war. It may be effectively self-defense. This is, generally against soldiers, so others who have, in a sense, opted into that situation. It's a world away from killing an innocent baby. An innocent baby is not an aggressor. There is no justification here. This is not self-defense. It's not a just war. But also this idea of conscientious objection being enough of an olive branch to those who are pro-life it's entirely inadequate. This idea that, well, we're going to kill babies. If you don't want to get involved, we'll respect that. You don't have to do it. Now, in fact, if you want to read on in the article, even that is in jeopardy with the WHO's guidelines that conscientious objection is sort of honoured, but if she really needs you to give the abortion because there's no one else around, you're obliged to do it, or if it would cause delay if you didn't, etc. So even that's in jeopardy. But this is one of the ways in which in our country we flatter ourselves with the idea that our abortion law is moderate and it's humane and it's balanced because, yes, there's a kind of conscientious objection here. But really it's a pretense that is anything close to humane, because yes, we could say conscientious objection is better than no conscientious objection, but it still puts all the focus on the adults and none on the babies, because conscientious objection is fine if the only person in the room is the one who may or may not kill the baby. But of course, they're not the only person in the room. There's a baby in the room, and that baby's life needs protection even more than the conscience of someone else needs protecting. It's a bit like when people used to say, well, if you don't like slavery, don't own a slave, which is a great argument unless you happen to be a slave. And so it is today. Don't like abortion, don't have one, or don't perform one, which is a great argument unless, of course, you happen to be a baby in the womb in need of protection. And if person A won't kill you, person B will. We mustn't lose sight of the main point here. Babies are being killed. They need to be defended. And after this clumsy pivot, he concludes with a huge leap in logic. So there is no simple right or wrong when it comes to the act of abortion. Because if we follow his argument, wars may be justified. It could be sometimes justified to kill babies in the womb. He's taking a side. He wants to shroud it in ambiguity, but his own hands have performed abortions. It's ever so clear that this is his view. And I think this comes perhaps into sharpest relief in his comment on vigils outside abortion clinics. So he recounts an anecdote. A wise friend, he says, was once discussing the issue of abortion with people who, with good intentions, held vigils outside abortion clinics to dissuade women from entering. He recounted the words of a woman who had had an abortion at such a clinic. What she needed, this is in quotation marks, what she needed was someone to be with her and support her after she had left by the back door, not someone accosting her on the way in. Now, the pronoun she there, of course, could refer to the pregnant mother in question. But what if it applied to the baby within her womb? What the baby needed was someone to be with her and support her after she had left by the back door in a clinical waste bin or incinerated, not someone accosting her on the way in. Again, if there is no baby in the womb, then maybe we could agree that it's totally up to the woman, and whatever she does is up to her, and maybe she does need more help after she's done whatever she's done rather than before. But if we don't forget the primary victim of abortion, if we acknowledge the baby in the womb, what that baby absolutely needs is someone before the execution, giving truthful information, prayerful support, offer of whatever help they may need to keep that child. Absolutely, that's what they need. We don't wait till after someone has been executed to go and make some offer of help. And he finishes his section on this. Like much that life throws at us, dealing with abortion primarily requires truth, understanding, and compassion, not dogma. Here's the great fallacy that, ironically, he himself is falling into, having accused the World Health Organization of imposing their agenda when they should be just sort of more neutral. He himself is opposing his pro-abortion agenda, and yet he's got the, shall we be generous, the lack of awareness required to realize that he himself is being dogmatic. There is no such thing as morally neutral. His dogma is you can't say abortion is wrong. His dogma is if a woman wants to have an abortion, she should get one. Okay, he stops short of trying to impose that on the entire world through the World Health Organization, but it's every bit as dogmatic as really what the World Health Organization is doing. It's just that he draws his lines slightly differently. And so I really want to close by considering this whole issue of neutrality. There's an idea that at their best, institutions like the World Health Organization should be neutral. I want to say that's impossible. There is no such thing as morally neutral. There was a comment on Twitter underneath this article that's where someone posted it, and the comment said something along the lines of, the World Health Organization is a secular organization. We don't need to listen to religious views from people like you. But of course, the view that it's okay to kill a human being in the womb is every bit as religious as the view that it's not okay to kill a human baby in the womb. The question is not, are you religious or secular? The question is, what is your religion? What is your moral worldview? Because all of us are worshippers, and all of us conduct ourselves in morally significant ways. There is no neutral. When it comes to whether or not you kill a baby in the womb, there is no neutral. And so, yes, David Bell's chief point that the World Health Organization should not be totalitarian, should not be trying to impose its views undemocratically on the rest of the world. Yes, that point stands. But let's not miss the most important point, which there is no neutral when it comes to the unborn child. What the World Health Organization should be doing is upholding the health interests of the unborn child. Indeed, there is a long-standing rights of human rights of the child connected to the World Health Organization. This is a UN document. Again, I can put a link in to the description, but it explicitly says that the child, by merit of their youth and their vulnerability and dependency and so on, deserve special care before and after birth. So the World Health Organization is really contradicting international human rights conventions. If you look at the whole article and the news story, you'll see that they're trying to suggest that to deny an abortion ever is a violation of multiple human rights. That's their argument. They're trying to say abortion is a human right, and denying an abortion violates several human rights. But they themselves are ignoring a long-standing human rights convention that the child has the right to life and care and nurture and so on before and after birth. So what the World Health Organization should be doing is upholding that right and insisting on healthcare for babies in the womb as well as for mothers. Again, that wouldn't be a morally neutral thing. That would be a morally right thing. And that's what they should be doing. But we've got to wake up to this idea, that this myth that there is such a thing as morally neutral, or that we should be content with things appearing to be morally neutral, because they never are. It's just that we've been hoodwinked into accepting or tolerating another morality. Where does this sort of land with us as the church? Although when it comes to abortion, we may or may not have a clear doctrinal position. We talked a bit about that last week. The Life Affirmation is a document that can help achieve doctrinal clarity for churches and individuals and organizations. Please do check that out if you haven't. We may think we've got a very clear position on abortion, and we may well have that notionally. But in our behaviors, are we also guilty of falling into the myth of neutrality? There are many influential Christians in the UK who speak into the public sort of forum, and they embrace the sort of multicultural, pluralistic society in which we live, and they set the bar very low for what we should expect from government and from laws, and think that we should actually embrace a plethora of different moralities, and as if our Christian worldview and as if our Christian morality are just preferences, really. It's not actually wrong and detrimental and offensive to a holy God that, for example, certain sexual behaviours should take place, or violence against unborn children, or whatever it may be, as if those things aren't eternally, morally, unchangeably wrong, but rather that's just how we see it. That's just our culture. it's just like fashion. It's just, well, that's like how we like to dress, or whatever, how we do our hair. But you know, if other people do it differently, well, that's fine. Now, there are some things that are preference issues. There are some things that I don't think we do need to concern ourselves with in terms of trying to impose things on other people. What your favorite color is, who cares? What your favorite ice cream is. These are not morally weighty things. And there is freedom in God's goodness, in his common grace. There's freedom for different personalities and different cultures, to some degree. But when it comes to moral issues, when it comes to killing babies, when it comes to enslaving people, when it comes to trafficking people, these things are not preference issues, and there is no neutrality. And we Christians need to wake up and stop acting as though our morality when it comes to abortion is as if it were a preference issue. It's just, well, that's how we see things. That's how we do things. Oh, I wouldn't have an abortion. Well, it's not, I don't like it. The question is not whether you like it or not. The question is not really whether or not you would have an abortion, though that, of course, is important. The question is, what are we going to do in a nation where every single day more than 500 babies are being killed in the womb? What are we going to actually do? Because our actions bear testimony to what we really believe. And our actions are declaring, in 95% of cases, vast majority of the UK church, our actions are declaring that we are accepting the moral settlement of the day, which isn't neutral. It is against the laws of God. It's against the dignity of his image bearers. It is ranged very much against the unborn child. 1 in 4 babies in the UK is killed in the womb. And by our actions, we, by and large, to a man, have stood back and said, that's okay. I'm not gonna fight that. I'm not even going to expose it and tell the truth about it. I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm going to keep it out of the pulpits. I'm going to keep it out of the youth work. I'm not going to bring it into the classroom. I'm not going to talk about it in public. It's not going to turn up on my social media. I'm not getting involved. You can have those babies. Satan, you can have them. Help yourself to them. I'm not going to get in your way. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to act is to act. Will we wake up and see that when any great injustice is taking place, there are only 4 roles we can play? Victim, don't get a choice about that. Perpetrator, bystander, defender. The perpetrators depend on the bystanders not to get in the way. The bystanders comfort themselves with the idea that they're not really the perpetrators, this has nothing to do with them, but in God's eyes, it is very much to do with them. We are our brother's keeper. And in, for example, Proverbs 31 verse 8, we read, be a voice for the voiceless. It's a command. It is to do with us. Proverbs 24, rescue those being led away to death. This is our business. We cannot accept the facade of neutrality. We cannot accept the immoral status quo in which babies are being killed in their hundreds every day. We may look at an article like this and be astounded by the cognitive dissonance and the way in which, as so often happens when it comes to the issue of abortion, otherwise intelligent people seem to drop by 50 IQ points. People stop making sense when it comes to abortion, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that we haven't got time to go into now. But we can balk at all of that. We can pick out inconsistencies. But what about us as the people of God? Are we consistent? Are we bringing a consistent Christian worldview and standing on it because we believe that sin is always sin and it's always harmful? It's never good for society. And do we believe that God's laws are actually good to the extent that we're willing to stand on them and promote them, not in ungodly ways, but using the means that God has given us, which we're not availing ourselves of, not even close to doing that? Are we going to stand up and actually be that voice for the voiceless and that salt and the light that we're called to be? Because to some extent, we have to look at an article like this and think the reason such nonsense can be published in what would see itself as one of the more intellectually incisive media outlets of the day is because the church isn't offering anything much better. And that's down on us. That's to us.